Welcome to episode 17 of AuthentiCity FM. I'm Corey Spiegel, joined by my friends and co-host, Mike Sable, the provocative contrarian, and Phil Corrali, the voice of calm logic. Those descriptive titles are courtesy of a Google Notebook analysis I did this week. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of community. Is it disappearing, changing, or maybe both? And it's a matter of perspective. And if you're curious how a discussion about community could possibly integrate the Jetsons, Brené Brown's 4 Types of Power, Vanishing Third Places, how digital connection created isolation, and if AI is going to make social media apps join MySpace and the tech graveyard, we'll see you on the other side. All right, that is my attempt at a Mike Sable cold open. We'll see how it works. I don't know. But my first question for you guys is, does your algorithm know you better than your neighbors?
100% yes.
I feel like I have to agree with Phil. That's 100% yes. I think it's funny. I don't know my neighbors in the same way that I think I used to when I was a kid. Well, so when you're a kid, like when I was of a certain age, you were just sort of thrust outside and you hopefully had some neighbor kids around you. And then you knew, right? You just knew all the families around you and you knew their houses and you're like, well, we could play over in this yard, but we can't play in this yard. And you knew kind of the comings and goings because invariably people would be out and you would see them in the yard and you'd strike up conversation. So, and I think the other thing I'll say is, this might be a surprise to some, but others not. Like I'm sort of the mayor of the block. And so I know all of the neighbors, but I don't know what they're doing. And I don't share like stories about me and my personal life. It's sort of like, hey, we're in this together and let's, Ken brings vegetables and Mary wants going to talk your ear off, but I don't like dive into my personal sharing. And so that I think is probably reserved for really close friends or algorithms.
So I think what you just said, Mike, is why our algorithms know us better than our neighbors is that to some degree, we're much more comfortable being ourselves in a digital environment. You're going to search for stuff. You're going to, oh yeah, Amazon, tell me how much this thing costs. And then it shows up in your digital profile, right? And so it keeps coming back. And so these digital friends that have been created generally know when we need laundry detergent, when our dog food is nearly out and it needs to auto replace. Those kinds of things are, I don't want to say things that we used to share with our neighbors, but I think they became, you'd run into each other at the grocery store and you'd run into each other. Now, all that stuff's showing up at your front door. It's if you're going to the grocery store, it's quick in and out. You're not spending any appreciable time. And so you just don't have those opportunities to get to know what your favorite brand of coffee is, as you might have in the past. I would just say from my standpoint, our neighborhood, I know a lot of our neighbors. It's not really a subdivision, but it's sort of like this big loop that's off of one of the main drags here in town. And if you don't have to drive back here, you don't really do it. So it's like 150 houses that kind of feels like it's its own little cocoon. It is funny because we'll all comment, my wife and I will comment, we'll be sitting in the kitchen looking, our kitchen faces the front of the house. And we'll look and we'll be like, whose car is that? I've never seen that car before. Did Amy get a new car, or is that somebody who's, just got lost? Because you don't have to be back here otherwise. But what makes that a little bit fun is that we do have a pretty great group of neighbors who seek each other out. And my favorite thing that we do in the summer is there's a text group and it's like, hey, it's 6:45. We're all meeting at the park. We have a playground in town. we're all meeting at the park at 7:15. Anybody could show up. Look forward to seeing you. And, it's always a different group, but it's always some people. And so I think, those kinds of things have been fun, but do they know me better than my algorithm? Hard pass. They don't.
So my story arc is a little different. When you grow up on 500 acres, there are no kids to play with. Fortunately, you learn that cows can be pretty entertaining now. And so I didn't have that childhood at all. Our nearest neighbors were over a giant hill on the other side. And the only thing that hill was really good for was sledding in the winter. You never wanted to take your bike up it because it was awful. And so when I think back to Phoenix, I don't think I ever knew any of my neighbors in either of my houses. Same was true in Denver. And then here, I know all of my neighbors. I know their dogs. I know their cars. We have a single entry neighborhood. It's probably 40 some houses, 4 cul-de-sacs. And so we all know each other, probably in an abnormal way for modern times. And I shared with you guys, last night I was sitting on my neighbor's porch. We were just chit-chatting, hanging out. And that's pretty common for us. It was 72 degrees yesterday, which in the middle of November is a really lovely day. And so I'm like, I feel like it's a porch day. And she's like, I agree. And so we will both sit on our back decks, but we will also go out front. And for the decade I've lived here, driveway drinking when the kids were littler was absolutely something that happened every weekend. So we don't have a neighborhood park. The nearest one's probably a mile away. But the kids got to run the cul-de-sacs, which was the childhood I never had. But I get why it was so great when people talk about their Gen X childhoods.
So you said I'm struck by this because I live in a city that has alleyways, and so you come in the back. It's sort of built in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s kinds of ages of houses, and so the fronts are a sidewalk, and that's where people come to and from, and you sort of park in the back. And so sometimes you have sort of these alleyway conversations, and sometimes you have sort of people passing through the neighborhood. As city people, I feel obligated to say, like, the way we design and build the built environment does impact kind of how we interact. How do you think that, if you've ever read Putnam's Bowling Alone, right? The advent of the garage door opener was a super great convenience for people, and it also hindered connection because invariably you would have to get out, open your door, you'd see a neighbor, you'd wave and say hi. Now I can just drive in, close it. I don't have to talk to anybody. How's the built environment shifted? And A, how's it shifted? And B, sort of what are the implications for us as we think about how we design going forward?
So I think a big part of that is balancing urban design principles with consumer behavior, right? I remember debating with elected officials when new plats would come in about, well, there are all these cul-de-sacs and, it's more efficient to have these through street neighborhoods for public works specifically. And so we did the math. We ran cost to serve, looking at public safety, looking at code enforcement, looking at public works. Now, this is in a city that is also very old and very new at the same time. So you have the full spectrum of revitalization happening in the older neighborhoods where there are alleyways. And so I think part of it is consumer behavior. Part of it is the type of neighborhood. There is no perfect answer, but I think it gets back to balancing all of the economic principles that go into what defines community.
Well, and I think some of it also, to your point, Corey, on consumer behavior is what we want out of our places that we live is somewhat different than used to be, right? And so, Mike, the kind of neighborhood that you live in was similar to the one that I used to live in that was served by alleys for garbage collection and garages. And those were things you didn't want to see, right? You didn't have attached garages because why would you? You have it goes out to the alley. That's great. Our old house had this amazing front porch, and my favorite thing to do when we lived in that house was to read the newspaper, the weekend mornings, and sit and watch people come by. And sometimes they'd say hi and wave, sometimes they wouldn't. but they'd be with their kids or they'd be walking their dogs. And it was the opportunity to interact with people. The concept of a deck for entertaining space or for fun completely supplanted the idea of a front porch. And so front porches died. The idea of having the ability to pull your car into your garage, close the door behind you, maintain a fairly steady temperature, unload your groceries directly into your kitchen became a very convenient way to live. But you drove into your garage, you closed the door behind you, nobody even knew you got home anywhere in your neighborhood. And so you change the opportunity to just randomly run into somebody as you're unloading your groceries into your house. And I think it ties back into what we were saying earlier, where, our consumer behavior is it's so much easier for Amazon to just bring me toilet paper and coffee and all these other things than it is for me to go to the store and get them. So now I don't have to interact with anybody, right? It's easier to just get my stuff and my life can be something else. So I think I imagine we'll swing into this conversation a bit, but how has that kind of changed the way that we find community? Because community used to be the neighborhood, community used to be the people you lived by, the place you lived, the city or the neighborhood that you lived, and it's not that anymore, right?
So for the benefit of the audience, I don't take notes today. I did bring a pen because I knew it was going to be a heavy topic, and I have now. I literally have. I have this. I made a note. So this is the show prep of the day. But there's something that I sort of I have never thought about it until Phil said it that way. Right, when you're like, if you can get everything you need brought to you and you don't have to interact with anybody, you never get to practice how to have interactions. And I wonder if that's one of the things that contributes to public forums being so awful, is because people have never had a chance to like say something out loud and have someone react to it and practice how to be influential or how to be tactful or how to be respectful and kind in a public meeting, because they've never actually talked to another human being before, because everything's been a digital transaction or a digital interaction. They've never been able to pick up on, oh, well, that was weird. Where if somebody leans back and says something, like that's an immediate trigger, because a lot of things that we convey is not through our words. It's through our body language. It's our posture. It's tone. It's those softer things. And if you've never had an ability to sort of practice them and engage with getting feedback and modifying and moderating behaviors, I wonder if that's one of those contributing factors. I don't know. Again, it feels like there's something there.
So let's connect it back to the algorithm, right? So when you exist in a digital world that knows you better than the humans just outside the inner ring of your life, it gives you more of what it thinks you want. And so you start to build a self-fulfilling echo chamber of thoughts, of people you connect with, all of those things, right? And I had lunch with a good friend last week who's a generation older than us. And our lunches are usually 2 hours, and there's usually not a topic off limits. And he's a pretty conservative Republican. And we talked about all of the things that you could possibly cover. And we don't agree on a lot of things. And I can only imagine what the poor people at the tables around us thought, because we're covering economic policy and whether tariffs really work and all, the government shutdown, all of these things. And we left and hugged and said, can't wait to do it again. That's what we lost when we decided Facebook or Twitter, pick your pill of choice, was the only space where we were really going to be real.
Well, and I think to tie to the algorithm, it's going to pull all the people that think like you into your world. And so your world is never fully challenged, right? You don't have those kinds of conversations because the algorithm is driving you down a path and it's pushing you to have the conversations that are going on around you be more comfortable, or affirming of what you're thinking about, or pushing you to try something that it wants you to try because you like something else, right? And so it's a it's interesting to me as we tie this into things like public comment, as we tie this into things like neighbor to neighbor interactions. I imagine this is true for you guys. It's very true for us. The number of people who call and say, "Hey, my neighbor's doing this thing. Can you guys tell them not to?" Is a really high number. And a lot of the time, we find ourselves in the position of being mediator between people who either don't want to disagree out loud or disagree so much they can't contemplate having a conversation. And so, what that means is they turn to us and they say, "Hey, government, I have a problem with my neighbor. I don't like the fact that they play music outside until 9 o'clock in the summers. Can you find some reason why that's illegal?" And the simple and the answer to that is it's not. And maybe you should just ask your neighbor to turn it down. Um, right? So, like those, we don't know how to have those conversations. It feels like.
Is it don't know how to, or is it just unwilling, right? Like, I believe everything in
both.
life sits
Yeah.
at the intersection of willingness and capacity. And I was thinking, I've got some notes on Putnam's book and what's changed, and even what's changed since 2000. And I have often said, outside of law enforcement, code enforcement is the worst job in city government, because you are challenged to basically do exactly what you talked about, enforce the conflict between neighbors. And you're the bad guy with both of them.
Right.
Like, so often you're in the lose-lose position of, well, why didn't they just come talk to me? Well, why don't you go talk to them? It's insane that I think it's unwilling, and I don't even know that it's unskilled. I think it's sheer laziness, and conflict avoidance, because, again, courage is hard. But, those poor code enforcement employees across local government, like, kudos for doing the really hard job.
I tell boring stories, and I do this all the time. You're right. Code enforcement is very difficult, and sometimes you have a council member who has an abundance of free time, and they like to go on walks in neighborhoods where they don't live, and then they come back with a list of the 37 things that they think are violations. So we jokingly wanted to put them, put a little hat on them and put a little uh, reflective jacket on there and turn them into staff members. So I just had a bit of a post-traumatic stress moment to kind of relive that piece. But I want to challenge this willingness capacity a little bit, because I think it is like the capability of doing it. When we promote first-time supervisors, we give them a pretty intensive training on how to have a crucial conversation, because the odds are good that they've never actually done it. And now you're going to have to hold your former friend accountable for bad behavior. We're going to give you some skills and some ways to teach you how to do it well. I just had this thought while we were talking about it. In our, monthly newsletter that we send out, we ought to put together a little script about, hey, your neighbor's probably going to do something that's going to irritate you. Here's a sample script that you can really help. Hey, I noticed that your music is on. I like to read at the same time. Is there something we could do where we could both have what we want? Maybe you turn it down earlier. I think there is probably a way to teach how to have these conversations. And one of the things that I'll say is, I work in a really racially diverse community. There are multiple languages that are spoken, and that language barrier does play a role in some of the conflict. And we've got to get comfortable with people being different. And maybe we can also teach that skill to our community members to sort of minimize some of the, Phil, your example is exactly right. I don't like this. You need to do something about it mentality.
I want to try to pull on something a little bit here, because I think it speaks back to kind of a more broad conversation about what community is, right? So when two neighbors are frustrated with each other because of loud music, or somebody cut a tree down, or somebody didn't cut a tree down, whatever, right? Um, how is that reflective of the health of the micro community that exists there, right? So I don't know that this was always true, but I remember growing up, you know, we we were very good friends to the point at which they were at my siblings' weddings and things like that with all of our immediate neighbors. And if something came up, you had a conversation about it, like, "Hey, Jack, your fence fell down over here. Can we work on it? I'm happy to help you do it." Right? Like it was a this is important to our micro community that your fence is up because it looks better for you. It looks better for me. It's meaningful to us. And together we're going to build it back better than it was before. I don't know that that exists in quite the same way as it used to. And I don't know if that was just, it was the generations of my parents, and the way that they interacted with their neighbors, or that my dad was kind of a handyman and he would be happy to help people do that kind of thing. But like, I think about that today when we get a complaint about, "Hey, my neighbor's fence fell down. Can you call them and tell them to fix it?" Or maybe you could knock on their door and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry your fence fell down. Can we work on this together? Is there something that we can do?" Or "Oh my gosh, your tree is going to break. Let's Hey, let's split the cost of this huge limb that's hanging over my house," or something. Where are we? Do we feel like we have a responsibility to help our neighbors and to build that micro community to be better than it was? And I sometimes struggle to believe that people still see that as their responsibility in any way.
So I think that connects back to Mike. In past episodes, you've introduced the concept of third places. And if we think about the generations above us, they had very distinct third places, and they evolved, and with each generation they continue to evolve. But I think in some ways neighborhoods as a collective used to be a third place also. And so you had church, you had whatever the community organization was, you had a neighborhood, you had all of those things, and there was a shared sense of care and responsibility. And as we've evolved, technology has been a big part of it, I think. That outward sense of humanity care, I think, has diminished, and maybe not intentionally, but I think it's been a byproduct.
Yeah, I purposely chose sort of where I live because there's certain things that I like, right? I mean, there's like, I can walk to different restaurants, I can walk to the coffee shop, the dry cleaners, everything is within sort of a walkable distance. Um, and I have been going to the same coffee shop for probably 20 years. And so I can walk in there and I'm going to know all of the staff members or most of them, and I'm going to know one or two people in the community that are there. We exchange pleasantries and it's great. There is a local restaurant in my neighborhood I have eaten at. I'm gonna probably say 500 times in my life. I know I'm gonna know somebody in there. I go to the same yoga studio, and I've been there 500 times, and like I had been out of out of practice for a while, and I got my favorite instructor this morning, and I was like, oh, it feels so good to be home. Because it's home. And those third places are places that feel like I can be myself here with whomever else is here, because it feels comfortable and it is home. And you do have to then cultivate it, because it's not, it doesn't just happen. You actually have to make it happen. Um, and I get this, like, not everybody can do that. And maybe I'm just wired differently, but, um, I do think as city leaders, we do play a role in sort of making third places real. That's why we have community centers. We know the value of connection. And that's why we actually seek to build it in our daily lives in terms of our work.
So I think that's exactly right. I think our role is to facilitate and to be thoughtful about community building from the standpoint of the third place, or from the standpoint of um, just having an environment that cultivates it, right? So the way that we work with businesses that want to open in our communities, the way that we think about capital investment, the way that we work through the budgeting process, right? How are we making sure that resources are flowing where they need to go? But we've also, and this is that part, Mike, kind of that you were talking about with respect to how do we put the script in the newsletter. We're going to work on creating those things. Now you need to support them, right? Your it is government's role at the local level, I think, to help facilitate community, but we can't force you to actually do it, right? You need to go and support that local coffee shop. You need to go and go to that new community neighborhood park. You need to show up for the community event that you say you want to have, and that we're going to put time, resources, and effort to create. We want you there, right? That's why it's being done. So your job now is to show yourself, bring your family, whatever, um, because we can't actually create community. Those connections between people is the community. Um, but it's our job to try to get them there, right? But that's where I struggle in when we talk about what it is people want out of their town, and you read community survey results and all those kinds of things. In a vacuum, I want a third place, but that third place isn't exactly the third place that I want. So I'm not sure I'm going to support it, even though that's what I'm asking for, essentially.
So I feel like we've kind of started to diagnose the problem. And so I want to bring back the things I saw online. There are many things this week. But I watched Diary of a CEO, which I think Stephen Bartlett is absolutely amazing and changing the world in the business he's in. But he had Brene Brown on recently. And she had two very interesting things kind of back to back. And she said, before any great progression, there has to be a regression. And so I think we've lived through the regression. And a big part of that, when she talked about it, was how we individually and collectively use power. And she had four specific kind of applications. There's power over, which is if you think about education, how schools function, traditionally anyway, how governments function, uh, corporations to some extent, right? There's power over. If you think about old school management, power over. There's power with, which for us is a little bit of this podcast. We work together. It is very much a with. There's power to, which is really when you kind of bequeath or hand over the power. It's not enabling, but it is allowing someone else to use the power. And then there's power within. And so when I think about willingness and capacity, it's the power within to have that self-confidence and that power of ownership to say, I'm going to be a good neighbor and I want a good neighbor in return. But I think we've lost a lot of power within, which is, again, probably tied to technology and how we behave. But we've also seen some pretty big abuses of power over. And we may be even living through some of those historical moments right now.
First of all, I freaking love Brene Brown. That's such a great, like, grouping of things, and I think um, I do want to touch, I guess, on power over and then get out of the way for a second. But um, power over is very powerful, and it is very much the world that we all live in and work within. And it's also very easy to screw it up. And so I think what I have seen over years and years, in every place that I have worked and in many places around me is that this fear of using that power to build the thing that you know you need to do because it's going to be hard. And so the power over is actually retracted and held close. And so the thing that your community needs waits for the courageous moment or the courageous person or people to come forward to say now is the right time, because they don't want to get it wrong. They care so much that they're afraid to screw it up. And I think that's when we talk about community, I think about that a lot in the context even of my own community, where we're now in this zone of saying we haven't done any appreciable redevelopment in our downtown business district in 30 plus years. And everybody's telling us we don't want to live in this house anymore, but we don't want to leave the community. This is a small place with not a lot of developable land. We keep hearing that we need more, modern retail spaces. We keep hearing that the streetscape needs to be tweaked and adjusted so that outdoor dining is better and parking is everybody's problem. We know about these things. So now, how do we use the power that we have to actually effectuate that change? Because it's going to build community. It's going to, but it's going to change it too. And I think that's where I just see a lot of fear around not doing it right and saying, "Ugh, if we do this and we mess it up, everyone's going to talk about us for the next 30 some odd years, and it's going to be a big joke." And so you don't exercise power. And how does that impact the ability to build out community? So I just want to throw that out. That was the first thing that popped into my head when you listed those off.
So I don't do show prep. I'd never actually heard this concept from Brené Brown, but it feels a little bit like the arc of community engagement and community empowerment, right? I mean, cities used to just do things. They used to just build roadways and build infrastructure and plow through, no pun intended. And then somebody said, well, maybe it'd be nice if you asked people what they wanted, and then you did this power sharing and then true story, I worked in a community that had, we were hiring, this is a long time, we were hiring our first community engagement staff person. And we had gone through the process of finding good finalists. And we went to the community groups and we said, you're going to make the final decision. We know these people are capable. We're willing to work with any of them. We're giving you the power to hire them. And they did, and it worked out great because the community actually knew what they wanted. There's this piece about power within that I think I'm struggling with a little bit because I don't know that we cultivate it enough to say that people actually have more of a say than they think they do. And it's like there's a guy named Peter Block. He wrote this book called Community. If you haven't read it, it's brilliant, right? He came out of Cincinnati area. He had these collective impact kind of groups, and he's really good about building and strengthening community. And the one thing that his premise was the community knows what it needs. It just needs the ability to have some support to execute. So I say all of that to say, part of our thinking on engagement and power sharing has shifted over time. I don't know that we get it right every time because, Phil, I think you're right. Sometimes you do actually just need this is the right direction and we're going to go there. And I think that applies probably more for me, like inside the organization. You need to make a bold, hard choice, and I am in the big chair, so I'm going to make it. Because I can, and I have the authority to do so. But as long as I'm having dialogue and conversations where I'm getting perspectives, that's what, maybe width is the target in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think this is a really fascinating sort of management philosophy question. And I actually, while I was here, Corey said something about this inability to let go of things so you can move forward. There's a great Peter Drucker quote probably 100 years ago at this point now, maybe 80 to 90 years. If leaders are unable to slough off yesterday, to abandon yesterday, they simply will not be able to create tomorrow. So there you go. I was able to reference Peter Drucker. My day is complete.
So I feel like that is a theme we return to a lot. Whether we're talking about our organizations, whether we're talking about the community that we're in, or if we've been, or that we see, is that this allegiance to something that keeps you from moving forward is the thing that keeps the success from being achievable. And I think as we tie it back into what we're talking about today, and admittedly, this is gonna be a little disjointed, I think, as I say this, but there's this the struggle. The struggle is being comfortable with a vision and saying we're going to get there. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be straightforward and simple. And we kind of all have to recognize that we're not going to get everything we want out of it. So, I just got back from a family vacation to Disney World, and it was great. We had a great time. We didn't get to do all the things that we thought we would get to do while we were there. Did we get to do a lot of things? Got to do a ton, right? And we saw things and parades and new parades, and it was great. But I didn't get to ride Tron, and I didn't get to ride Test Track, both of which I was very excited to ride because, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. But that didn't make the trip worthless, right? And I think sometimes as we think about building, whether we're talking about growing connectedness or growing community and building the stuff, the physical stuff that it makes up, if we don't get it all, it may not be worth doing. And we throw our arms up and we say, well, you know what? It was a good try. We'll try again in 10 years. And we eliminate the opportunity to think about what we could have gotten, even if it wasn't all the things that we projected that we needed before we even knew what the thing could be. And I say that all from the standpoint of I'm winging it, but part of where I think our communities struggle is that community is too hard to build. So why try? That development is too grandiose or too idealistic, or that park can't get built there because there's no resource. So you know what? I guess we just won't. And then everybody goes back and they throw their hands in their pockets and they shrug it off and they're frustrated. And how we have to find the way to help overcome where expectations set and those types of things. So it's just I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes. Collectively our own worst enemies when we're talking about these kinds of things.
So I'm going to grab your discomfort and combine it with opportunity cost, which is absolutely one of my absolute favorite economic principles ever, and pivot a little bit to another article that was in the Atlantic last week. And it's "The age of anti-social media is here." And the subhead is "The social media era is over. What's coming will be much worse." And so two things I want to talk about. We started with, does your algo know you better than your neighbors?
We're going real
so
light today and on the subject matter stuff. I just want to point that out.
Well, you two had the privilege of seeing the crazy mind map that happened after we recorded our last podcast. So this is actually just insight into how my brain works on a normal Tuesday, which is terrifying. But Mike, you and I both have an interesting story about social media and how our usage has changed. And then I want to kind of dive into how AI is going to change not only social media, but I think how businesses, and if you think about kind of local community, neighborhood groups, any of those things, how they transact getting information into the world. So do you want to go first?
Nope, I'm going to follow your lead.
So I had read an article before we all went to ICMA I forget which university it was out of, but they had just completed a study and they had the whole test group population give up on a social media platform. So let's pick on Meta because that's where my example goes. And so you didn't have to give up both if you had Instagram and Facebook, but you had to give up one for a certain period. And they did some psychological testing on the front side and on the back side. And there was a very significant positive improvement in overall mental health, which doesn't seem overly surprising necessarily. And so I decided, I'm like, you know what? For the rest of this year, I'm going to delete both apps, those two apps off my phone. And so I didn't delete my accounts. I still have them. I can get to them through the desktop. But I'm like, I'm going to take that muscle memory literally off my phone, which let me tell you, being at the airport on my way to Tampa without those buttons that I have hit for years, and I know my brain knows exactly where they are. I don't have to think about it. And so that changed. And my whole emotional decision was not only the mental health side, but it was the idea that time is finite. And what am I doing with my time? And is social media the best use of it? And it had come up this week about, did I see pictures of a friend? We all got to see the Aurora Borealis up here and it was amazing. And so there was a family member that had posted pictures and, oh, did you see that? And I'm like, no, I deleted Facebook. And my son's like, but you're addicted to it. How could you delete it? And I'm like, okay, there was the sign that I absolutely needed to do that, to experiment and see, one, if I could do it, and two, to start to recognize how I started using my time differently.
That's brilliant. I don't really want to say anything else, but you said I had to say something. So I got rid of Twitter because I kept there were some incidents in my neighborhood, in the community, right, real tragedies, and people were awful on there. And I was like, I just don't need this. And then I unsubscribed, I deleted whatever, I took the app off the thing, and that was months ago, and I have not been back, and I don't miss it at all. And I actually had a moment where I got sucked into this. You guys made fun of me for not knowing how to use Instagram, so I've been trying to learn Instagram, and I find myself infuriated with it doesn't ever stop. And that's the point, right? They're commoditizing attention, commoditizing how many 3-second reels I can watch on a loop for hours. And it turns out it's pretty awful. So that is the next thing I'm doing, is I'm going to get rid of that, because at the end of the day, I saw the Aurora Borealis. It was beautiful. I texted you guys. I had the connection. The platform, I didn't need to send it to the universe. I could send it to the people with whom I wanted to share it. And that's what I did. And I think that is maybe the other piece about this is it's choice. Do I need to present this to the world, or do I need to present this to the people that I want to share it with? And I think that maybe is the reckoning that social media will go down. We'll dive into why AI and what comes next is going to be worse, because I want to go all the dark, heavy things on a podcast. But yeah, so I find myself increasingly analog, and I'm loving it. So, Phil?
All right, so I'm gonna contrarian this a little bit, because I appreciate where you guys are coming from, and I totally buy into, especially the use of time argument, because I think where I see the greatest failure of social media is the way that it steals from the user, right? It steals your time, which is our most precious commodity. We have no ability to add to it. We get whatever we get, and you don't know how quickly you're depleting it. So when you're spending 2 hours rotating through a reel set and you're like, oh my God, how did I just lose 2 hours of my life? How has that been a negative impact? I think the question that I think social media has always brought up is, why do we use it? And in a government context, I remember, I think I've said it to you guys before, somebody once told me, I think Instagram is something we really should start using. And I'm like, a picture sharing site? Why the hell would we do that? That doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants us to share a picture of Public Works picking up leaves. They just want us to pick up the leaves. And yet now we're sharing all sorts of stuff on social media. And I think part of the struggle that I have with it, and it's a tug of war, if you will, is there is a benefit in seeing what is happening with those platforms from the standpoint of the voices, even the ugly side of it, to understand that reality sits out there, but also to find kind of the glimmer of good that does exist in some of these places. Now, I will tell you, Facebook has become, over the last couple of years, just one of the more toxic places for you to spend your time. And I just don't understand it. I think it's the way it's built. I think it's the user base. Facebook is kind of the OG social media platform. And so the people that are on it are the ones who've been on it since it started almost 20 years ago. Instagram is newer, generationally a little bit different. And then, I haven't gotten into TikTok or anything like that in any appreciable way. But I can see the ability to like pull yourself away from it and get away from it and not experience life through it. But I don't think we can deny the fact that community is built through it, whether we like it or not. And these communities, these groups of people who have aligned themselves together aren't just going to stop. And yes, we can not be aware of it and be comfortable with that. But there's a risk that goes along with that too. And I don't know exactly what that means for me as an individual or as a professional and how I utilize it. But I will say that a cold turkey approach to it would not work well for me.
I appreciate that perspective because it forced me to sort of rethink, and I there are parts of what you said that I agreed with because um, a lot of our work is storytelling, right? Um, when we do our work perfectly, nobody notices. And so, right, that's hard to then go ask for, oh, by the way, we need just a little bit more money to keep doing these things that you don't notice. Because when a roadway is smooth and works and it moves traffic and goods and services and all the infrastructure underneath it works, that's how it's supposed to be. Like, you're not supposed to notice us. Um, and so but the storytelling behind how difficult it is to staff and equip a police department to respond on a 911 call within a certain number of minutes, fully prepared to respond to any emergency that pops up, that is incredibly hard. And requires hundreds and hundreds of hours of planning and preparation and literally millions of dollars. But so if you don't talk about how it takes to build that, you know, getting that officer trained and equipped and in a car and in the neighborhood and be able to respond, and use any of your examples, right? When the baby ducks fall in the sewer grate and you fish them out, that's usually the story that we run because it's cute, but it is also that took preparation and thought and like a level of professionalism to say, we know this is going to happen. Here's going to be our response. We're going to train for it. We're going to execute it when it happens. And so you're right. If we don't tell the story, I can maybe see some value in turning social media, I'm going to say it like into an advertisement, which is actually what it is, right? It's an advertisement for your attention. But hopefully people like what we share.
I think there is a difference between the professional and the personal side of it. And I think we have a responsibility, if we're going to use it on our personal side, to recognize what it's doing to us as people and to curate it in a way that doesn't bring us anxiety, but finds a way to bring us joy. And I don't know that I'm good at that, but I do know that it's important to me who I follow and who I don't, from the standpoint of the information that they give me. So I love following Brene Brown. because I will legitimately get something out of every reel that she is a part of. And I'm not going to follow somebody that I don't get something out of, right? So it's like, I think we have to think about it in that way of it is a community. It is it will rob you of what you need, which is time, but how you use it, if you're going to use it, is important.
I think the challenge is we feed the algos to teach us we only want to see the things we want to see. And so when you talk about it from the professional perspective, there are so many businesses I used to follow on Facebook that I would never see. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if they have a deal this night or whatever, because that's not what the bots were feeding me. And I think that's maybe the shadow that everyone needs to be aware of is, yeah, I love Adam Grant. I love, there's so many, Mark Manson, Brene Brown, all of them. But if that's all I follow, I'm never going to learn to consume contrarian viewpoints that will actually make me think more holistically. And so I think that's a little bit of the catch-22 is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I only want to see positive psychology stuff. And so that's all the robots are going to feed me. So I'm never going to see something that challenges how I see the world. And I think that's how we got here, quite frankly.
All right, so that's a perfect segue, Corey, into the other thing that you saw on the internet, which I want to hear about, like this. So I love the Atlantic, and I haven't read this article. When you talk about institutions, we'll probably dive into like why were why magazines invented, and the Atlantic is one of the founding, right? Probably the first monthly publication ever made right out of the 1830s. I guess this is like an incredible institution. So talk to me about why is the next iteration of social media generated by AI going to be worse?
Well, it connects to everything we've kind of talked about, and that's that AI is becoming a companion. And there are some other articles. There was one in the New York Times last weekend that literally went into people who are in a relationship with a chatbot, which to me is terrifying. But we're there. Like this is real life. And so one of the things I had pulled out for my notes is ChatGPT is currently 3 years old. And let that sink in for a hot minute, because what AI has become to us over this last 3 years is pretty wild. Twitter was about the same age when it formally introduced the retweet. Now, if you think about the spectrum of social media and these little incremental nuances, we are literally just at the beginning. And so we don't know what AI is going to do, but we know it's going to change everything. And you and I were having a conversation the other day about all these businesses that, they don't have websites. They only have Facebook pages. And when, we all built websites for whatever reason, usually government, but there are a lot of other websites out there. You worked on SEO, like that became the thing. Well, old school SEO doesn't work the same way that AI integration works now. And so if the only presence I have is Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and in the case of local governments, if you haven't updated your website like in the last 2 years, this is going to be a real problem or opportunity for you, because the way AI pulls from kind of the metaverse is fundamentally different. And so the two parts of that is kids are using AI as therapy, real thing. People, adults, are using it for relationships. And that's complicated, I'll say. But it's also sourcing information from the full spectrum. And so while our algorithms are really refined on social media, until you start using AI really consistently, I think it gives you a little more broader perspective, or at least you can tell it to be contrarian with you.
So so I appreciate you sharing that. So our city is going to do a new website, and I have been thinking about this, right? So if the AI is searching for the best possible answer to answer whatever the question prompt that you put into it, it is pulling from websites. And so, and then they are then good ones are linking to those sites and saying, "Here's where I found this information." Um, and so there's this there's this great juxtaposition. Like we have been uh, trying to get to the spot where we're really concise and everything is a bullet point, and you use the F framework for websites where people's eyes goes, and you want to use as few words as possible. And it has been shorter, 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 faster, whatever, right? But now if AI is learning from you, our websites are actually going to have to be longer and richer and have more text to provide more context and a bigger platform for AI to draw from. So I think this is, the graphic designers of the world are going to hate this, but sometimes you're going to need a wall of words because the bots are looking for as many words as they can use to provide a really good answer. And so, right, if you're Civic Plus and all of these local government website firms, you got to be thinking about how that's going to work. The other part that I think is interesting, and this is probably for a later show, is how do you use AI within your internal systems to do process improvements, like fully automated process improvements, to do all of the kind of the work using kind of our historical records. Like you can, if you haven't written a council packet report using AI and some old models, like you should do it. You're going to save hours and hours of time. And it's still your own original content. So it's not cheating in the sense that you're having the bots do it. But I'm not going to dive into the personal relationships other than to say Hollywood predicted this in a movie called Her. It stars Joaquin Phoenix and somebody else. He's sort of the main character, and falls in love with an operating system. And it's really fascinating. Right. It was terrifying at the time, but actually probably worth going back to watch. So yeah, I'm not going to dive into should ChatGPT be my therapist yet.
It's a heavy lift. So this is all making a lot of weird wheels in my brain turn, but the struggle we have right now is that we are not building a real world anymore. The tangible thing that you relied on, the physical book or the file of historic documents that you would refer to build that that board report that you were just referring to, don't exist. They maybe exist, but they exist digitally now. The tangible thing has been scanned and shredded, and it's gone, because that's the right way to do it, right? That's the way we can derive as much benefit and value as quickly as possible from it. And it completely devalues the value of that thing, of having it. So when you talk about that in a relationship sense, or you talk about that in the sense of how social media works, or you talk about that in the sense of why people are having personal relationships with AI chatbots, it's because they're not having personal relationships with people, right? And so it is the next thing. It is the way that we will interact with one another. Whether it's, I mean, if you looked at your usage of data versus minutes on the phone, how many more text messages are you sending versus having a conversation with a person on the phone? In my case, 90-10. 90% text messaging, 10% phone. The person I speak to every day on the phone is my mother. Is there anybody else? No. And why is that? Because my mom doesn't have a cell phone where I could send her a text and say, "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" I have no other choices. So in this fake world, and maybe that's a strong word, but in this world that has been created around us, where we devalue the interpersonal conversation, where we devalue the tangibleness of sitting behind a desk and gutting through something and thinking through it, because it's not efficient anymore. We wonder why neighbors don't want to talk to each other. We wonder why it's hard to get people to be kind to each other in difficult circumstances. We wonder why we can't get through a public hearing without somebody screaming an expletive into a microphone, because that's what they do if they were texting or commenting or whatever. So I guess my question, and maybe this is for another time, but my question is, we are living in a world that's becoming less and less real. And yet we all know the value and power of authenticity. AuthentiCity FM, follow us on all of the podcasting platforms. We recognize the value of authentic relationships. So what is our role in a fake world of finding a way as city managers, as leaders in our communities? Forget our professional titles. As people who care about community being a thing, what is our role in building an authentic world?
So I think that gets to be the interesting juxtaposition, is we're looking at the real world as we know it, as we grew up with. And our parents had their own version of that. Our children will have a much different version. We view our version as right because it's our experience. But that may not be true across generations. And I think that's where the nuance of third places and community get really complicated, because everyone's going to come at it from what their version of what's best looks like. And until we can have really meaningful discourse about that, that's where I think it gets even more complicated. All right. Well, then we'll pivot into something lighter. So we've talked about institutions, and the Jetsons were an institution of my childhood. So let's talk about what they got right. I had AI compile a whole list of the things they got right. And considering the Jetsons first aired in 1962, I want to let that sit in for just how long ago that was. Here's the list. So video calls and video conferencing,
Check.
smartwatches, flat screen TVs, robotic vacuums, digital newspapers on your tablet, 3D printed food actually exists, dog treadmills. I could probably have fun with that. Talking alarm clocks and smart home assistants.
Yep.
Drones and flying pods. Tanning beds, which when you think back to this was started in the 60s is a little weird. Medical camera pills, which I remember that episode. Self-driving cars. We're on the precipice of that. Moving sidewalks and conveyors. And then jetpacks are in development right now. And Phil, in honor of just getting back from Disney, holograms.
Mm-hmm.
So those were all the tangible things they got right. Then there were some of these social things that they touched on, that kids were more comfortable with technology than their parents, that push-button convenience culture would become how we live, and that maybe living above the clouds is in our future. So there you go. Lighter cartoons, something we all grew up watching. Think back to how much we've watched the world change and become everything they predicted, or almost everything.
I think it's fascinating. And I think one of the things that I laugh at, so in the Jetsons opening scene, right, George Jetson flies and he goes to the office and he presses a button and his car folds up into a briefcase and he walks in the briefcase and he goes to the office. I was so nostalgic, I actually went back and like rewatched like the opening credits. It was really fun. And it's funny, there's a guy in my neighborhood, he has one of those bikes that folds up into a little hand. And I'm like, very Jetsons like in sort of the design about like, I can fully ride a bike or I can carry it like a briefcase. We've talked about this before in previous episodes. So like, subscribe, go back, watch earlier episodes. Do you like how we worked that in there? But like there is something about this convenience piece, and like Corey, you talked about like this push button element about automating life is good because it frees up a lot of time, but we don't like leverage the time gained in productive ways. And so go back, check that out. But Phil, you were going to say something.
No, the only thing I was going to say was the folding car would make my parking problem so much easier. So I would like somebody to figure out how to do that. That would be great. That would be awesome. In fact,
But so there, right? People are working on literally the flying car, right? They're working on it today. There's prototypes out there. You can find videos of it. As city leaders, as we sort of think about, like we're nerds, we're government nerds. We think about infrastructure, like we have the roadway network. The cars are going to need a network above us that doesn't land and crash into things, because that's going to be the big worry. And so, can you really have a flying car operate in the same airspace as roadways, as the interstate system? Are they going to be able to fly over neighborhoods? Within our lifetime, someone is going to write the ordinance that regulates where cars can fly. And
well,
I'm
I think,
serious, like we're
uh,
going to do that.
yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's so self-driving cars are a thing that are real. They don't work perfectly, but they're getting there. Um, I remember reading an article, I don't know, 20 years ago, talking about self-driving cars and what infrastructure they were going to need in order for them to be effective. And almost everything that we thought at that time was that you had to build a physical set of infrastructure components for self-driving cars. So sensors in the roadway. That's not how self-driving cars work anymore, right? The concept is the car itself is the technology. You don't need to have physical infrastructure aside from a roadway. The car can be the thing. And so I think, to your point, like when we think about flying cars or transport pods, because I don't think we'll call them cars, if they're flying around, I just got through an airport, two airports that it was chaotic. Air traffic controllers, that is a job I would never want. These people are amazing in what they're able to deal with. Now, think about putting 1 million transport pods in the sky and still having commercial air traffic. How the hell does that work? Right? And so I think we are going to be, in the next 10 years, having conversations about that. It is going to be real. Maybe less than 10 years. But to your point, we're going to have to come up with the way that it's going to work, because it hasn't ever been done before. So let's start. Let's figure it out. Go Jetsons.
So I had in my list of questions kind of the meta question that underlays all of what we've talked about. And so I think this will
Meta,
be
the
a
social media platform, or Meta,
no, meta,
the Meta?
the general principle concept.
Gotcha. All right. Just pulling it together.
Yeah, I have complicated feelings about the other meta. And so I think this will be a good lead in as we talk about the next episode, because we have talked about the fall of community in a lot of different ways. But did we trade connection for convenience? And if we did, can we trade back?
Well, it's such a fascinating question, because you can go back through literal eons, right? The only way to get food was to hunt it or gather it. So like this element of convenience is, right, we are hardwired to put stuff on autopilot because it's less taxing on our brains, and we maximize efficiencies. Right. And in some ways, like, even I go just to circle back, the AI bots that give us the thing that we want more of, is one of those efficiency things. Now I can get the thing I want as fast as I can, and I don't have to worry about anything else. I had this conversation with a friend, and it is the holiday season, and almost to a person, I have heard over and over and over again, God, I really need Christmas this year. I can't wait to have Thanksgiving this year. Um, lots of people, it's the day after Thanksgiving, you put up the holiday decorations. You walk through neighborhoods now
That's
and they are
terribly late. That's terribly late. I just want to point that out for the record.
like that was sort of when I was it was the day after Thanksgiving and they all came down on New Year's Day. Like that was the season. You can go through and I am looking in, and I'm not talking outside decoration stuff. I'm talking like you look in and I can see holiday trees, holiday lights, decorations, the things that people uh, are longing for. And so I'll circle back to two other things. We talked about grandma hobbies as that connection thing. I think so, Corey. There is probably a little bit of correction for the efficiency, the on demand, the slowing down is a real thing because I think our bodies and our souls are sort of calling for it. The question for us to sort of wrestle with is uh, how do we collectively get to say no as leaders in organizations? And I'll tell one story. So I'm a big change agent at work. I love talking about what's next. I love talking about the future. And I'm going to work today so we can be prepared for this thing that's coming. And the good news is there's always the next thing coming. So I don't actually stop. But I had one of my trusted staff members she and I have this incredible rapport. And she was like, it's just too much. And I was like, all right, I respect that. We won't do this one thing. And she's like, thank you. And as leaders, that level of attunement to the psyche of the organization, to the psyche of the staff, is something that we actually have to. It's one of our obligations to do. So, uh, if things are spiraling and it's getting chaotic, turn down social media and put out candles. Trust yourself. And tap into those sort of instincts. And is maybe what I'll say. And it comes to your organization. Be open to asking that question about, okay, is this too much? Is there too much spiraling? Do we need to resettle for just a day or two? So I don't know. It feels important to say out loud that I think is the thing I'm thinking about.
So a point that I want to pull on what you just said, Mike, is as we contemplate things like the holidays and kind of all of the stress that comes along with them, um, even though there is this warmth that I think they bring as well. Um, it's how we value what we value about those things, right? So is it about, Christmas morning and there's 5,000 gifts under the tree, or is it we're not going to do 5,000 gifts under the tree, but we are going to go on vacation, right? We're going to build memories. We're going to spend the time together. Because I think, Corey, to your question all the way at the beginning of this segment, I don't think it's a loss that we can't go back, or that it's impossible, or that the future is upon us and that's just the future. We can have those experiences. We need to be thoughtful about them. We need to create the space for them to happen. Um, One of my favorite things to do, and you'll all see this behind me pretty soon, is we have a lot. I happen to like Christmas a bit. Um, we have 5 trees in our house, and the outside is very tastefully decorated. Always very. I do not do inflatables. Sorry if anybody who loves those. Um, it's reeds on the windows and warm white twinkle lights all over the place. Like it's. But for me, I do it because it brings me joy and peace. And I will sit in this room that we record in on a cold winter night with the fireplace on and the tree lit, with nothing else on, and just sit. And it's one of the few times in my year where I am completely content to do nothing but that. And I think we owe it to ourselves to create the space to allow us to disconnect, to disengage, to not pick up our phones and text somebody or call somebody or check social media, whatever, but to just sit and allow ourselves to be. And I think that's something that we talk about it a lot on this podcast in so many different contexts, but we do come back to it. It is best if we allow ourselves to be who we are. And in that moment, that's who I can be. And so I think in these times, it is critically important for us to make the space to take those steps backwards away from the progress that is here. Can't avoid it. We all use it. It's there, but it's okay to go analog. It really is.
So both of you made me think of different things. And Phil, I love that you use the word content. So I'm working on a presentation I have to give next month. And it reminded me a little bit of what Craig talked about on our episode with him about striving and seeking. And so in my case, I spent 23, 25 years striving, next degree, next job, next promotion, next. And over the past 2 years, what I've found my goal is not next. It's legitimately content. I am happy that yesterday I spent 2 hours on a beautiful, warm, sunny Friday in the middle of November listening to book on my back deck with my dogs. Like, could have I been doing 100 other things with that time? Sure. But do I regret that I spent 2 hours listening to a great book outside getting fresh air? Not one bit. And so that's my new benchmark is a content life, a peaceful life. And that reminded me, and it's interesting because I'm going to come at this from two different generations. So my son has had a phone for a couple years, but he literally turns his notifications off. He doesn't get any because he finds the chaos of a preteen chat group to be insane. And so he's like, oh, I just have my notifications off. And I'm like, okay, so he's 12 and could have figured that out. Like, we can literally just turn off notifications. So last night I was reading an article about Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of Chase, and he keeps his phone use to a minimum during the workday, including turning off notifications and ignoring most text messages. He runs a $4.6 trillion company, and his answer is to turn off notifications because if it really matters, you'll call.
I feel like that is the perfect segue, right? I mean, those are two, right? So your son has an opportunity to take over a $1 trillion company because he's thinking like a CEO, which is terrific, right? I mean, that is, right, no pressure. You don't have to do that, but if it's a goal to strive, that could be one of those targets. But there is something really powerful in that choice, right? Because he's right. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the show or not, but George Shultz was the Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, and he had this concept, and Dan Pink talks about it in a lot of his stuff, is he had a Shultz Hour. And for 1 hour every week, he would sit in his office with a pad of paper and a pen. And he said, I'm going to close the door. There's only two people in the world who can bother me, my wife or the President of the United States, in that order. Because he knew what his priorities were, and he used the time to think and be thoughtful and be creative and to sort of turn off the noise so he could create some clarity in his thinking and in his life. And I think I've not adopted it, right? Because I'm frenetic and I'm easily distracted. And so it's hard for me to have that depth and length of time. But I do think recurringly there's this theme of this power of time. And to be an authentic person, you need to be covetous of time and using it to build content, Corey, to your comment about, 2 hours on a deck listening to a book sounds amazing. I bet it was.
It's a permission question, right? It comes back to giving ourselves that permission to have the Shultz Hour, or to sit and listen to a book, or to go for a walk, or to sit and look at your Christmas tree while the fire is on, right? Like it's why have we not given ourselves that permission? Where's that coming from? And I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't do it, but gosh, um, it's been a bit of a theme lately, talking about self and um, prioritizing those things that are meaningful. And is there anything more meaningful than time at this point, right? So listen to
So,
the book, do it.
yeah. So speaking of time, we are coming up on the end of part one of a multi-part episode because, in fairness, all of the episodes sort of thread together, and so they're like, if you're just discovering us, the other ones are just as good as this one. But Corey, I know that you brought the run of show today, which you're really grateful for. You're grateful for your thoughtful leadership. What did we miss, and what is coming up next?
So I don't think we missed anything because, again,
That's a
it is
first. Look at that.
literally a crazy mind map of things that don't make sense until we magically weave them together. But the goal was to talk about community through different lenses. And again, anywhere you can get the Jetsons and Brene Brown and AI chatbots in the same conversation that at least hopefully remotely makes sense is pretty spectacular. But we didn't want to focus just on the fall of community. And so, Mike, you joked about this being a heavy episode. Sometimes we pick topics that are heavy because to do them justice for this profession, for the communities that our profession serves, is something we've chosen to lean into and not run away from, because the hard topics are the important ones. But whether it's cliche or not, you can't come with the problem without at least trying to explore the solution. So our next episode will be our attempt at ideas on rebuilding community and why that might look different across generations and why that's okay.